Right. Hi, third grade novel study group. We are meeting again on Fridays to keep reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So every Friday, I'm going to upload a video to our YouTube channel so we can continue reading this book until we get finished. So it's always good to finish what you've started. So we are going to finish. In the description below each video, I will have a link that takes you to an assignment that goes along with the chapters that we will be reading together. You will be able to answer those. I'll go over that more towards the end. So this is mostly for us to review and read, and then I'll go over the assignment with you. When we left for spring break, we had just finished a packet for chapters 3 and 4, and then I gave you an assignment to read chapters 5, 6, and 7 over spring break, and then we never came back. So hopefully you've read chapters 5 and 6, because those are the two chapters that we're going to review today. So if you haven't read chapters 5 and 6, then stop this video and go read chapters 5 and 6, and then come back and you can be part of the review. Then we're going to read chapters 7 and 8 together on this video. So there's a digital copy that I'm going to share with you, and then I'll also put the link to that just in case you didn't bring your book. So this will be a pretty long video because I'm going to read 2 chapters with you. If at any moment you, like if we could finish chapter 7 and you want to push pause and take a break and then come back and read with me to chapter 8, that's fine also. That's one good thing about technology is you can push pause. When we were sitting in the library together, you can't push pause if you want to take a break. So you can push pause and take a break. The reason I'm going to do it this way is because one, in case there's some of you that didn't bring your books home, you can read with this one. Another reason is that sometimes it's hard to stay motivated to read. I know that you have some other books that are being read to you, and then I know that the library visit where I'm reading books to you, and then I know that you have some homework that you're having to work on, some assignments, and I don't want this to be overwhelming and you feel like you have tons of stuff. So I'm going to just read it with you, and maybe that will help you stay motivated to finish because this really is a good book. I think that's it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to, first we're going to review this. Oh, also I'm going to keep the assignments. They're not going to be very long, just a few questions, just to make sure you're understanding what we're reading about and get you thinking. And I apologize for the glare coming off of my glasses, so sorry. Okay, so here is the digital copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And if you click this little button down here, it makes it a little bit bigger. So we're going to review, and if we go to the table of contents, and the chapters are highlighted, so you can just click on the one that you want to look at. So we're going to review 5 and 6. All right, on the back side of, or on the back on this side of the door. All right, so this is where Edmund and Lucy come back. Remember Edmund? We had found out that Edmund had gone into Narnia. And in chapter 5, we learn that he comes back through Narnia, through the wardrobe, and Lucy, of course, is excited because somebody was going to believe her. And then this was really sad how it says, and now we come to one of the most nastiest things in this story. Okay, so do you know what the most nastiest thing of this story was so far? All right, when Peter and Susan ask him about it, he decides to lie and say, yeah, he has no idea what she's talking about. There's not another country, and it's really sad, and it really breaks Lucy's heart. So once again, we can see what kind of person Edmund is by what he does and what he decides to do when he is presented with this option of whether he can tell them that, yeah, he's been there or not. All right, so then I'm looking at my notes so I don't forget what to bring up, so that's why I'm looking down. All right, so Peter and Susan decide to go talk to the professor because they are worried that he's going to find out that maybe Lucy's losing her mind or something. They keep saying that she's gone mad. So they go and talk to the professor, and he basically tells them, well, you know, is Lucy the kind of person that lies? Or is she the kind of person that tells the truth? Or is she crazy? And so they kind of have to make the decision that she does always tell the truth. So he kind of is like saying, well, if she always tells the truth, then she must be telling the truth. Whatever, all the stuff that the professor says in chapter 5, does it make you feel like maybe he's been through the wardrobe before and he knows all about Narnia? Because that's what it sounds like after what he talks, after the way that he talks to them. All right. And so I think they felt like, okay, Lucy's not mad. Maybe she's telling the truth. But that would be really hard if somebody was trying to tell you that if you go in your closet and you go through the back, that there's another country. That would be really hard to believe, even if that was the most believable person you've ever known in your life. If they were trying to tell you that, that would be really weird. So they kind of are having a hard time. But then they talk to the professor, and he's like, you know, if she always tells the truth, then she's probably telling the truth. All right. So then, if we move on to chapter 6. All right, so Mrs. McCready, who's the housekeeper, she walks around and gives house tours to this big, gigantic home that they're living in, and the kids are trying to get out of the way. So they go, the last option is for them to run into the room with the wardrobe, so that's what they do. And they realize, you know, there's something sticking me in the back. I feel like I'm sitting on wet stuff. And then they realize, you know what, that's trees and snow. And they look around and they're like, we really are in another country. So, let's see, let me get to the part. All right, so right here, by Jove, you're right, said Peter. And look there, and there, it's trees all around. And this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've gotten to Lucy's woods after all. All right, and so Peter turns to Lucy and says, I apologize for not believing you. So now they all realize, Peter and Susan, that, you know, she was telling the truth. All right, and let's go down to, now remember, Edmund said there wasn't another world. All right, so he tries to pretend that he doesn't know that he never did know. So right here we find, I say, began Edmund presently, oughtn't we to be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we are aiming for the lamppost. He had forgotten for the moment that he mustn't pretend, or that he must pretend never to have been in the wood before. And the moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself up anyway. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. Peter whistled. So you really were here. That time Lou said she'd met you in here, and you made out that she was telling lies. Okay, so once again, what do we see? What a mean person that Edmund is. All right, so if we keep reading chapter 6, we find that they go through and they walk around. They're going to see Mr. Tumnus, remember the fawn, and they go and they find a piece of paper and they find things not looking quite right in his cave. And then it says, we read right here where it says, the former occupant of these premises, the fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and waiting on his trial on a charge of high treason against Her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia. All right, so he's been arrested. Anybody know why he's been arrested? Now, I can't hear you. That's the sad thing about us not being together, but you can answer in your head out loud or maybe to somebody who's listening. So Why do you think he was arrested? Okay, so obviously the White Witch found out that he had met with Lucy. And remember, if he saw a human, what was he supposed to do? If he said he was supposed to kidnap them and take them to the queen, that's right. And remember, he didn't do that. He fell down and cried and had a breakdown because he felt so bad about doing that and he couldn't do it. So obviously the queen or the White Witch found out and she came and arrested Mr. Tumnus. All right, so they decide that they're going to go look for him in chapter 6. And they have nowhere to start. And they start following. What do they start following? Anybody know? Okay, I know if I was with you, I know somebody would say Robin. So yeah, they started following a Robin. All right, and then Edmund, who is Edmund, decides to try to put doubt in Peter's mind. If you read down here at the bottom of this page, it says, if it comes to that, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are in the right and the queen? Yes, we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong. We don't really know anything about either. All right, so Lucy knows that the White Witch is awful because of what Mr. Tumnus told her. And she's convinced Peter and Susan pretty much, who don't really know what's going on, but they do believe Lucy. And Edmund, who the only person he's ever met was the White Witch, and she was really nice to him. So whether he really believes she's really nice or he just wants more Turkish delights and wants to be king, we're not sure, but we will find out as we keep reading. All right, now we are at chapter 7. And we're going to go ahead and remember, so we're going to read all of chapter 7 and all of chapter 8. And then I'll go over the assignment really quick. And then the links for what you will need will be in the description below this video. All right, so let's start with chapter 7, A Day with the Beavers. All right, while the two boys were whispering behind, both the girls suddenly cried, "Oh," and stopped. "The robin!" cried Lucy. "The robin, it's flown away." And so it had, right out of sight. "And now what are we to do?" said Edmund, giving Peter a look, which was as much to say, "What did I tell you?" "Shh, look," said Susan. "What?" said Peter. "There's something moving among the trees over there to the left." They all stared as hard as they could, and no one felt very comfortable. "There it goes again," said Susan presently. "I saw it that time too," said Peter. "It's still there. It's just gone behind that big tree." "What is it?" asked Lucy, trying very hard not to sound nervous. "What is it?" said Peter. "It's dodging us. It's something that doesn't want them to be seen." "Let's go home," said Susan. And then, though nobody said it out loud, everyone suddenly realized the same fact that Edmund had whispered to Peter at the end of the last chapter. They were lost. "What's it like?" said Lucy. "It's like a kind of animal," said Susan. And then, look, quick, there it is." They all saw it this time, a whiskered, furry face which had looked out at them from behind a tree. This time, it didn't immediately draw back. Instead, the animal put its paw against its mouth, just as humans put their finger on their lips when they are signaling for you to be quiet. Then it disappeared again. The children all stood holding their breath. A moment later, the stranger came out from behind the tree, glanced all around as if it were afraid if someone was watching, said, "Hush," made signs to them to join in the thicker bit of the wood where it was standing, and then once more disappeared. "I know what it is," said Peter. "It's a beaver. I saw the tail. It wants us to go to it," said Susan, and it is warning us not to make a noise." "I know," said Peter. "The question is, are we going to go to it or not? What do you think, Lou?" "I think it's a nice beaver," said Lucy. "Yes, but how do we know?" said Edmund. "Shan't we have a risk at it? Shan't we have to risk it?" said Susan. "I mean, it's no good just standing here, and I feel I want some dinner." At the moment, the beaver again popped its head out from behind the tree. and beckoned earnestly to them. "Come on," said Peter. "Let's give it a try. All keep close together. We ought to be a match for one beaver if it turns out to be an enemy." So the children all got close together and walked up to the tree and behind it, and there, sure enough, they found the beaver. But it still drew back, saying to them in a hoarse, throaty whisper, "Further in, come further in, right in here. We're not safe in the open." Only when it had led them into a dark spot where 4 trees grew so close together that their boughs met, and the brown earth and pine needles could be seen underfoot because no snow had been able to fall there, did it begin to talk to them. All right, so right here where he says it's not safe in the open. So do you know what he's afraid of? Okay, so he's afraid of the white witch. All right, "Are you the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve?" it said. "We're some of them," said Peter. "Shh," said the beaver, "not so loud, please. We're not safe even here." Why? Who are you afraid of?" said Peter. "There's no one here but ourselves." "There are trees," said the beaver. "They're always listening. Most of them are on our side, but there are trees that would betray us to her. You know who I mean." And it nodded its head several times. "If it comes to talking about a side," said Edmund, how do we know you're a friend?" "Not meaning to be rude, Mr. Beaver," added Peter, "but you see, we're strangers." Quite right," said the beaver. "Here is my token." With these words it held up a little white object. They all looked at it in surprise, till suddenly Lucy said, "Oh, of course, it's my handkerchief, the one I gave to poor Mr. Tumnus." "That's right," said the beaver. "Poor fellow, he got wind of the arrest before it actually happened, and handed this over to me. He said that if anything happened to him, I must meet you here and take you on to—" Here the beaver's voice sank into silence, and it gave 1 or 2 very mysterious nods. Then, signaling to the children to stand as close around it as they possibly could, so that their faces were actually tickled by its whiskers, it added in a low whisper, "They say Aslan is on the move. Perhaps he has already landed." And now, a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do, but the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream that somebody says, which you don't understand, but in the dream it feels as if it had some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you could remember it all your life and are always wishing you could get into that dream again. It was like that now. At the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling that you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it's the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. "And what about Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "Where is he?" "Shh," said the beaver. "Not here. I must bring you where we can have a real talk and also dinner." No one except Edmund felt any difficulty about trusting the beaver now, and everyone, including Edmund, was very glad to hear the word dinner. They, therefore, all hurried along behind their new friend, who led at a surprisingly quick pace, and always in the thickest part of the forest, for over an hour. Everyone was feeling very tired and very hungry when suddenly the trees began to get thinner in front of them, and the ground to fall steeply downhill. A minute later, they came out under the open sky. The sun was still shining, and found themselves looking down on a fine sight. There were standing on the edge of a steep, narrow valley, at the bottom of which ran, at least it would have been running if it hadn't been frozen, a fairly large river. Just below them, a dam had been built across the river. And when they saw it, everyone suddenly remembered that, of course, beavers were always making dams, and felt quite sure that Mr. Beaver had made this one. They also noticed that he now had a sort of modest expression on his face, a sort of look people have when you're visiting a garden they've made or reading a story they've written. So it was only common politeness when Susan said, "What a lovely dam!" And Mr. Beaver didn't say, "Hush," this time, but merely a trifle, and it isn't really finished. Above the dam was what ought to have been a deep pool, but was now, of course, a level of dark green ice. And now the dam, which lower down was more ice, but instead of being smooth, was all frozen into the foamy and wavy shapes in which the river had been rushing along at the very moment when the frost came. And where the water had been trickling over and spurting through the dam, there was now a glittering wall of icicles, as if the side of the dam had been covered all over with flowers and wreaths and festoons of the purest sugar. And out in the middle and partly on top of the dam was a funny little house shaped rather like an enormous beehive, and from a hole in the roof smoke was going up, so that when you saw it, especially if you were hungry, you at once thought of cooking and became hungrier than you were before. That was what the others chiefly noticed, but Edmund noticed something else. A little lower down the river was another small river which came down another small valley to join it, and looking up at that valley, Edmund could see two small hills. Okay, remember when he met the Queen of Narnia, which is really the White Witch, remember she had described to him how to get to where she lived so he could bring the children, his brother and his sisters. All right, and looking up at the valley, Edmund could see two small hills, and he was almost sure they were the two hills which the White Witch had pointed out to him when he parted from her at the lamppost the other day. And then between them, he thought, must be her palace, only a mile off or less. And he thought about Turkish delights and about being a king. And I wonder how Peter will like that, he asked himself, and horrible ideas came into his head. Here we are, said Mr. Beaver, and it looks as if Mrs. Beaver is expecting us. I'll lead the way, but be careful and don't slip. The top of the dam was wide enough to walk on, though not for humans. A very nice place to walk because it was covered with ice. And though the frozen pool was level with it on one side, there was a nasty drop to the lower river on the other. Along this route, Mr. Beaver led them in a single file right out to the middle where they could look a long way up the river and a long way down it. And then they had reached the middle. They were at the door of the house. Here we are, Mrs. Beaver, said Mr. Beaver. I found them. Here are the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And they all went in. The first thing Lucy noticed as she went in was a burring sound. And the first thing she saw was a kind-looking old she-beaver sitting in the corner with a thread in her mouth, working busily at her sewing machine. And it was from it that the sound came. She stopped at work and got up as soon as the children came in. So you've come at last, she said, holding out her hand, both her wrinkled old paws. At last. To think that ever I should live to see this day. The potatoes are unboiling and the kettle's singing, and I dare say, Mr. Beaver, you'll get us some fish. That I will, said Mr. Beaver, and he went out to the house, Peter with him, and across the ice of the deep pool, where he had a little hole in the ice, which he kept every day with which he kept open every day with his hatchet. They took a pail with them. Mr. Beaver sat down quietly at the edge of the hole. He didn't seem to mind it being so chilly, looked hard into it, and then suddenly shot in his paw. And before you could say Jack Robinson had whisked out a beautiful trout. Then he did it all over again until they had a fine catch of fish. Meanwhile, the girls were helping Mrs. Beaver to fill the kettle and lay the table and cut the bread and put the plates in the oven to heat and draw a huge jug of beer for Mr. Beaver from a barrel which stood in one corner of the house, and to put on the frying pan and to get the dripping hot. Lucy thought of the Beavers had a very snug little home, though it was not at all like Mr. Thomas's cave. There were no books or pictures, and instead of beds, there were bunks like on board ship, built into the wall. And there were hams and strings of onions hanging from the roof, and against the walls were gum boots, and oilskins and hatchets, and pairs of shears and spades and trowels and things for carrying mortar and the fishing rods and fishing nets and sacks. And the cloth on the table, though very clean, was very rough. Just as the frying pan was nicely hissing, Peter and Mr. Beaver came in with the fish, which Mr. Beaver had already opened with his knife and cleaned out in the open air. You can think how good the new fish caught smelled while they were frying, and how the hungry children longed for them to be done, and how very much hungrier they still had become. Mr. Beaver said, "Now we're nearly ready." Susan drained the potatoes and then put them all back in the empty pot to dry on the side of the range, while Lucy was helping Mrs. Beaver to dish up the trout, so that in a very few minutes everyone was drawing up their stools. It was all three-legged stools in the Beaver's house, except for Mrs. Beaver's own special rocking chair beside the fire. And preparing to enjoy themselves, there was a jug of creamy milk, and for the children, Mr. Beaver stuck to beer and a great big lump of deep yellow butter in the middle of the table, from which everyone took as much as he wanted to go with his potatoes, and all the children thought, and I agree with them, that there's nothing to beat good freshwater fish if you eat it when it has been alive half an hour ago and has come out from a pan half a minute ago. And when they had finished the fish, Mrs. Beaver brought unexpectedly out of the oven a great and gloriously sticky marmalade roll, steaming hot, and at the same time moved the kettle onto the fire, so that when they had finished the marmalade roll, the tea was made and ready to be poured out. And when each person had got his or her cup of tea, each person shoved back his or her stool so as to be able to lean against the wall, and gave a long sigh of contentment. "And now," said Mr. Beaver, pushing away his empty beer mug and pulling his cup of tea toward him, "if you'll just wait till I've got my pipe lit up and going nicely, why, now we can get to business. It's snowing again," he added, cocking his eye out the window. "That's all the better, because it means we shan't have any visitors. And if anyone should have been trying to follow you, why, he won't follow any tracks." All right, so mostly chapter 6 then, or 7, was about what? Right, so them realizing that what an even bigger liar and horrible person Edmund is, and them meeting Mr. Beaver and Mrs. Beaver, and realizing that Mr. Tumnus had been arrested. So as we move on to chapter 8, what happened after dinner? "All right, and now," said Lucy, "do please tell us what's happened to Mr. Tumnus." "Oh, that's bad," said Mr. Beaver, shaking his head. "That's a very, very bad business. There's no doubt he was taken off by the police. I got that from Bird, who saw it done." "But where's he been taken to?" asked Lucy. "Well, they were heading northward when they were last seen, and we all know what that means." "No, we don't," said Susan. Mr. Beaver shook his head in a very gloomy fashion. "I'm afraid it means they were taking him to her house," he said. "But what'll they do to him, Mr. Beaver?" gasped Lucy. "Well," said Mr. Beaver, "you can't exactly say for sure, but there's not many taken in there that ever comes out again. Statues. All full of statues, they say it is. In the courtyard and up the stairs and in the hall. People she's turned," he paused and shuddered, "turned into stone." "But Mr. Beaver," said Lucy, "can't we, we must do something to save him. It's too dreadful, and it's all on my account." "I don't doubt you'd save him if you could, dearie," said Mrs. Beaver, "but you've no chance of getting into that house against her will and ever coming out alive." "Couldn't we have some stratagem?" said Peter. All right, and so this word right here means kind of like a clever trick. So can't we have some clever trick, is what that word means, said Peter. Couldn't we dress up as something, or pretend to be, peddlers or anything, or Watch till she was gone out? Oh, hang it all. There must be some way. This fawn saved my sister at his own risk, Mr. Beaver. We can't just leave him to have that done to him. It's no good, son of Adam, said Mr. Beaver. No good you're trying, of all people. But now that Aslan is on the move. Oh, yes, tell us about Aslan, said several voices at once. For once again, that strange feeling, like the first signs of spring, like good news, had come over them. Who is Aslan? Asked Susan. Aslan, said the Beaver. Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood, but not often here, you understand. Never in my time or my father's time, but the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen all right. It is he, not you, that will save Mr. Tumnus. She won't turn him into stone too? Said Edmund. Lord love you, son of Adam. What a simple thing to say, answered Mr. Beaver with a great laugh. Turn him into stone? If she can stand on her 2 feet and look at him in the face, it'll be the most she can do, and more than I expect of her. No, he'll put all the rights, as it says in an old rhyme in these parts. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death, and when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. All right, so if you haven't read chapter 8, when it says, and when he shakes his mane, that kind of gives you a hint as to what or who Aslan is. So what do you think Aslan is if he has a mane to shake? So what has a mane to shake? So there's your hint. You'll understand when you see him, but we shall see him, asked Susan. Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you to where you shall meet him, said Mr. Beaver. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Aslan, a man, said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly. All right, can you imagine trying to meet a lion? So that would be really scary. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mr. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. I'm longing to see him, said Peter, even if I do feel frightened when it comes to the point. That's right, son of Adam, said Mr. Beaver, bringing his paw down on the table with a crash and made all of the cups and saucers rattle. And so you shall. Word has been sent that you are to meet him tomorrow, if you can, at the stone table. Where's that? Said Lucy. I'll show you, said Mr. Beaver. It's down the river, a good step from here. I'll take you to it. But meanwhile, what about poor Mr. Tumnus? Said Lucy. The quickest way you can help him is by going to meet Aslan, said Mr. Beaver. Once he's with us, then he can begin doing things. Not that we don't need you too, for that's another of the old rhymes. When Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at the care paravel enthroned, the evil time will be over and done. So things must be drawing near their end now he's come and you've come. We've heard of Aslan coming into these parts before, long ago, nobody can say when, but there's never been any of your race here before. That's what I don't understand, Mr. Beaver, said Peter. I mean, isn't the witch herself human? She'd like us to believe it, said Mr. Beaver, and it's on that side she bases her claim to be queen. But she's no daughter of Eve. She comes of your father Adam's. Here Mr. Beaver bowed. Your father Adam's first wife. Her they called Lilith, and she was one of the jinn. That's what she comes from on one side. And on the other side, she comes of the giants. No, no, there isn't a drop of real human blood in the witch. That's why she's bad all through, Mr. Beaver, said Mrs. Beaver. True enough, Mrs. Beaver, replied he. There may be two views about humans, meaning no offense to the present company, but there's no two rivers about things that look like humans and aren't. I've known good dwarfs, said Mrs. Beaver. So I've now you come to speak of it, said her husband. In general, take my advice. When you eat anything that's going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human once and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it and feel for your hatchet. And that's why the witch is always on the lookout for any humans in Narnia. She's been watching for you this many a year, and if she knew there were 4 of you, she'd be more dangerous still. Because of another prophecy, said Mr. Beaver, down a Cair-Paravel. That's the castle on the sea coast down at the mouth of this river, which ought to be the capital of the whole country, if all was as it should be. Down the Cair-Paravel there are 4 thrones, and it's a saying in Narnia, time out of mind, that when 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit in those 4 thrones, then it will be the end not only of the White Witch's reign, but of her life. And that is why we had to be so cautious as we came along. For if she knew about you 4, your lives wouldn't be worth a shake of my whiskers. All right, so at this moment right here, we learn why. Remember when the White Witch approached Edmund and wanted him to bring his brother and sisters to Narnia, and then once he did, to bring them to her palace, is because right here. So what does it say? Whenever 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit in those 4 thrones, then it will be the end not only of the White Witch's reign, but of her life. So not only if they sit in those thrones, not only will she not be queen anymore, but she won't be alive anymore. So that's why she wants to meet the other humans that Edmund knows, not because she wants to meet them, but because she's terrified that they might take her rule away in her life. So, all right, all the children had been attending so hard to what Mr. Beaver was telling them. Okay, that means attending means they'd been paying attention so hard. Attending so hard to what Mr. Beaver was telling them that they had noticed nothing else for a long time. Then during the moment of silence that followed his last remark, Lucy suddenly said, I say, where's Edmund? And there was a dreadful pause, and then everyone began asking, who saw him last? How long has he been missing? Is he outside? And then all rushed to the door and looked out. The snow was falling thickly and steadily. The green ice of the green pool had vanished under a thick white blanket, and from where the little house stood on the center of the dam, you could hardly see either bank. Out they went, plunging well over their ankles into the soft new snow, and went round the house in every direction. Edmund, Edmund, they called, till they were hoarse. But the silently falling snow seemed to muffle their voices, and there was not even an echo in answer. How perfectly dreadful, said Susan, as they at last came back in despair. Oh, how I wish we'd never come. What on earth are we to do, Mr. Beaver? Said Peter. Do, said Mr. Beaver, who was already putting on his snow boots. Do? We must be off at once. We haven't a moment to spare. We'd better divide into 4 search parties, said Peter, and all go in different directions. Whoever finds him must come back here at once. Search parties, son of Adam, said Mr. Beaver. What for? Why, to look for Edmund, of course. There's no point looking for him, said Mr. Beaver. What do you mean? Said Susan. He can't be far away. Yet, And we've got to find him. What do you mean when you say there's no use looking for him? The reason there's no use looking for him, said Mr. Beaver, is that we know already where he's gone. Everyone stared in amazement. Don't you understand, said Mr. Beaver. He's gone to her, to the White Witch. He has betrayed us all. Oh, surely. Oh, really, said Susan. He can't have done that, can't he? Said the Beaver, looking very hard at the three children, and everything they wanted to say died on their lips, for each felt suddenly quite certain inside that this was exactly what Edmund had done. But will he know the way? Said Peter. Has he been in this country before? Asked Mr. Beaver. Has he ever been here alone? Yes, said Lucy, almost in a whisper. I'm afraid he has. And did he tell you what he'd done or who he'd met? Well, no, he didn't, said Lucy. Then mark my words, said Mr. Beaver. He has already met the White Witch and joined her side and been told where she lives. I didn't like to mention it before, he being your brother and all, but the moment I set eyes on that brother of yours, I said to myself, treacherous. He had a look of the one who had been with the White Witch, or the witch, and eaten her food. You can always tell them, if you lived long in Narnia, something about their eyes. All the same, said Peter in a rather choking sort of voice, we still have to go and look for him. He's our brother after all, even if he is rather a little beast. And he's only a kid. Go to the witch's house, said Mrs. Beaver. Don't you see that the only chance of saving either him or yourselves is to keep away from her? How do you mean? Said Lucy. Why, all she wants is to get all four of you. She's thinking all the time of those 4 thrones at the Care Parabel. Once you were all 4 inside her house, her job would be done, and then there'd be 4 new statues in her collection before you'd have time to speak. But she'll keep him alive as long as he's the only one she's got, because she'll want to use him as a decoy, as bait to catch the rest of you. Oh, can no one help us? Wailed Lucy. Only Aslan, said Mr. Beaver. We must go on and meet him. That's our only chance now. It seems to me, my dear, said Mrs. Beaver, that it is very important to know just when he slipped away. How much can tell her depends on how much he heard. For instance, had we started talking of Aslan before he left? If not, then we may do very well, for we won't know what Aslan has come to Narnia, or that we are meeting him, and will be quite off guard as far as that is concerned. I don't remember his being here when we were talking about Aslan, began Peter, but Lucy interrupted. Oh, yes, he was, she said miserably. Don't you remember? It was he who asked whether the witch could turn Aslan into stone, too. So he did, by Jove, said Peter. Just the sort of thing he would say, too. Worse and worse, said Mr. Beaver. And the next thing is this. Was he still here when I told you about the place for meeting Aslan was the stone table? And of course, no one knew the answer to this question. Because if he was, continued Mr. Beaver, then she'll simply sledge down in that direction and get between us and the stone table and catch us on our way down. In fact, we shall be cut off from Aslan. But that isn't what she'll do first, said Mrs. Beaver. Not if I know her. The moment that Edmund tells her that we're all here, she'll set out to catch us this very night. And if he's been gone about a half an hour, she'll be here in about another 20 minutes. You're right, Mrs. Beaver, said her husband. We must all get away from here. There's not a moment to lose. All right, and so chapter 8, again, they realize that how awful Edmund is. All right, so who is Aslan? Aslan is the lion and the leader of the whole wood, and he can be the one that can defeat the White Witch, along with if they all sit in the 4 thrones. Is anyone wondering at this point how they're going to get Edmund to sit in one of the thrones? Because right now he seems to be the only one that is not really agreeing with the other three, does he? All right, so you have an assignment over these questions or these chapters. Let me show you what they look like. All right, so I'm going to link these and the digital copy of this book that you can read in the description below this video. All right, so here's the questions for you to answer. First of all, really quick, I just wanted to go through how you can turn this in. So when you pull up these questions, it should look like something like this when you pull it up. So when you pull it up, you can either, if you have a printer, you can print this out and answer your questions on it. And then you can, if you have a setup at home where it lets you scan things, and you can scan it and then attach it to an email and send it to me. If you can't do that, that is totally okay. You can print it out, complete it on this paper, and you can have your parents take a picture of it after you've already filled it all out. Take a picture of it and email it to me. If you can't print it out, then that's fine too. Then you can do number two. You can just pull up these questions and answer them on your own sheet of paper, and then have your parents take a picture of the piece of paper that you wrote the answers on, and then they can email that to me. And then when I get yours, I will let Mrs. Wilkie and Mrs. Lamoran know that I got it. And here is my school email address for you to email that to me too. I also wanted to point out that, if you can do this, that's fantastic. And if you can't, that's totally okay too. I don't want you to stress out about it. And I don't want you to spend your time going, I don't know what we're going to do because I can't do these questions. It's okay. The whole point is for us to finish together and enjoy this time, even though we're apart, to try to spend it together and read it and finish a really good book. So this book is like a classic, and it's great for you to have read this book. So, all right, so here's the questions. I'm not going to bother reading them because I know this video has been really long. If you've made it this long, I'm so proud of you. So, and I'm about to lose my voice too. So, here are the questions. So there's only 4, not very many. So, I know we didn't go over chapter 8, 7, and 8 very much. I just kind of hated to do that since this video has been really long with me reading all of the chapters. So we'll briefly review it next Friday, and then we will read chapters 9 and 10. So if you want to read it ahead, that's fine too. I mean, I would prefer you did that, and then we could just review. Let me show you again what this looks like when I send it to you. I'm going to link this book to you if you don't have your book. So, and then remember, if you click this the little box that came up at the top, that's not it. This right here, you can make it bigger like this, and you can make it smaller like that. So, right, and also if you have any questions, you can also email me at that email address also. So see you later, and I hope that you have a really good weekend.